Welcome to Session 4, which is on ICT applications for adapting to climate change. The objectives of this session are to raise appreciation of the need to adapt to climate change, and second, to provide some examples of ICT applications for climate change adaptation. So what are we talking about when we say adaptation? What are we adapting to? Well, first of all, we expect some negative impacts from climate change here in Asia and the Pacific. By the 2080s, we're expecting that millions more are projected to experience floods from sea level rise. So as the sea levels go up, it will flow down to the low-lying areas near the coasts. Second, we're expecting more precipitation, mostly as rainfall, but also as snowfall. And therefore, they will lead to runoff, or water cascading down slopes. This will happen in the countries or regions found at higher latitudes in Asia, and in some places that are already wet and tropical. And this will lead to the higher probability that a flood will occur in these countries. Third, we're expecting there will be a reduction in the mass or the body of glaciers, and a reduction in the amount of snowpack that falls. This means that there will be less fresh water available for drinking, for agriculture, and for hydropower from the meltwater that used to come from glaciers and snowpack. For small island developing states, like those in the South Pacific, like Timor-Leste, like Maldives, the sea level rise will worsen the inundation that comes from the coast. It may worsen the impacts of storm surge. It can lead to coastal erosion that will reduce the amount of land available and pollute the reefs, and it can reduce the quality of the water resources that are found in the reefs. Second, the higher ocean temperatures that will come from global warming may cause corals to bleach. And third, there are secondary impacts that include the destruction of coastal infrastructure and natural resources. So why are we expecting all of these? This next slide shows a chain from the climate changes upon temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise. And from these changes, there will be impacts on health, on agriculture, on forestry, on our water resources, on our coastal areas, on the species and the natural areas of the earth. And from the impacts on these sectors, we can see more poverty. We can expect perhaps more natural hazards to occur, like flooding. You can see more disease and death. So in other words, there is a long chain of events from the climate change itself to the impacts on our livelihoods and our well-being. So then how can ICTs help us to adapt to these changes? First of all, it can improve our understanding of the environment. Second, it can help people, communities, and organizations to adapt by helping us understand the phenomena and discuss among ourselves what to do. And third, it can build our capacity for adaptation itself through direct application. So now, let me explain what we mean by these three. First of all, ICT applications can help facilitate climate change observation. Now, how do we do this? We can set up instrumentation to help us collect data about the climate, about the temperature, humidity, rainfall and snowfall, and sea levels over large areas. We can use automated meteorological or weather stations. These are essentially machines that have lots of sensors connected on it so that it can monitor the climate variables. And finally, we can use remote sensing, which is mounting sensors on satellites that orbit the Earth, and use these to monitor such things as precipitation and sea level. When we collect the data, we now go to the topic of climate change modeling. Here we can use computers, supercomputers, and even smaller PCs to make calculations, to create climate models. And then we can downscale. This is a technical term meaning that these models will be made more relevant to smaller and smaller units of the Earth. So this is a big feat of computer technology combined with software, combined with scientific research to produce the software. I would like to now talk about the projected climate change impacts that were found using these computer models. For North Asia and East Asia, what we expect are more frequent and or longer heat waves and more frequent heavy precipitation. So this will be for countries such as China, Korea, and Japan. Now for Central Asia, South Asia, and West Asia, we can expect more frequent and or longer heat waves. That means there will be more periods of dryness. Now, if we think of those projected climate changes, we also need to think about the impacts that will come out of them on the sectors such as water, health, agriculture, coasts, ecosystems, and disaster risk management. Adaptation will require us to analyze what makes a sector vulnerable, decide on an adaptation vision or target, identify the different strategies, and set priorities for where we would like to go in the future. And finally, we implement the chosen adaptation strategies. This sounds very abstract, but no matter what you are studying in your current university degree, you can make a contribution to climate change adaptation because we, in effect, have to adapt in almost every aspect of our life. The next slide shows a table of the identified vulnerable sectors and the kind of adaptation measures they need to do. So for example, in the first line on water resources, if there will be less water that will be falling on an area, then a country will have to think about how to manage water better. So you are someone who uses water. How will you manage your water better? If you're an engineering student, you can contribute to improving engineering techniques for conserving water and transporting water. If you are studying agriculture, you can think about how to manage your crops so that your crops will require less water. And then for ICT applications, we could benefit from the use of sensors that measure soil moisture or measure the quality of the water that comes to us. So this is just a brief snapshot of what kind of ICT applications are available for water management. And as you go through the sectors of agriculture, human health, ecosystems, and disaster risk management, they have their corresponding adaptation measure requirements and corresponding ICT application to meet these requirements. Now I would like to take you through some case studies on how ICTs have been applied to help with climate change adaptation. The first case study is about global precipitation measurement. So we have been measuring the precipitation in the atmosphere using satellites. And then we use the sensors on the satellites to help us monitor the precipitation that is happening and then use this within climate modeling. Now this kind of monitoring and modeling is being performed by the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency and others. And then the outputs of this measurement is posted on the web so that other scientists can access the data. Students of geography, meteorology, physics might be interested in this next case study on the Nepal Climate Portal. Here, data on historical climate parameters of Nepal have been turned digital and placed online, along with the downscaled predictions of what the future climate will be in the country. So if you are interested, you can view the data on the website indicated on the slide. The next case study might interest people who are studying agriculture and biology. The Asian Development Bank had sponsored a study to develop scenarios for the Asia Pacific up to 2050. They wanted to see what would be the impact of climate change on the agriculture sector. And they used several computer-based models to derive the impacts on the economy, to look at the different crop models, and as well to see the different climate futures that would interact with the economy and the crop models. So this is all computerized analysis, which were fed to experts, and then they made their recommendations. The next case study is on an urban services monitoring system that uses SMS and the internet. Now, what we have here is an example of a city government that wanted to monitor the complaints that its citizens were making related to health, water supply, sewerage, and solid waste services. The rationale was that these are the services that will be affected by climate change. So they wanted to monitor if things were getting worse and if there are pockets where problems are occurring. So they used not only the SMS and internet technologies, but also a kind of spatial analytic software called Geographic Information Systems. The next case study is about the monitoring and early warning of an outburst flood from Lake Saras. So this lake is found in Central Asia, and it has been formed by a landslide that blocked the flow of water. Now the water is coming from the melting of glaciers and snow melt on top of mountains. And because of the way the lake was formed, they are worried that there will be further instabilities from earthquakes that may make the lake burst. Because the amount of rock that had dammed the lake is not stable. And they are also worried that with climate change, more water will flow down. So then ICTs are being used for hydrological, geological, and hydrogeological monitoring. They also have an emergency communication system so that when water levels are critical or there is a rather severe earthquake, the communities downstream that may be flooded will be alerted. There is also an early warning system and a risk assessment that was fed through the use of geographic information systems and satellite-obtained data. And finally, there are many climate change adaptation learning platforms that are online. You can look at these listed platforms and do a little bit of research. It's easy to find nowadays using search engines, where you can teach yourself about adaptation. No matter what your subject matter is that you're studying, adaptation must be important. So I would like to summarize the session with the following points to remember. First, we need to be able to identify sectors and communities who will be exposed and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, because these are the ones that need to adapt the most. Second, we can use ICTs to help us with the climate modeling and downscaling so that we can narrow down what may be happening in our future. And finally, we can use computer modeling techniques to determine the possible impacts. So I hope you found this session on climate change adaptation interesting enough to trigger your own research in the area. Please, I encourage you to try out the different activities and exercises in the session, and that these will help raise your skills in order to be a better informed citizen about climate change adaptation.